You're listening to an African Elements top news story for July 18, 2025. Please visit our website at africanelements.org for more daily news. Racial Violence, a Profitable Spectacle by Darius Spearman, African Elements. Alligator Alcatraz refers to a controversial detention facility in Florida. It has become a symbol of racial violence and state-sanctioned oppression in America. This term echoes a terrible past, the racist trope of black children used as alligator bait. Jim Crow-era media, like postcards and souvenirs, reflected this dehumanizing practice. Contemporary references and merchandise from some Trump supporters perpetuate this grim legacy. They commodify extreme racial violence and oppression. This normalizes and profits from ongoing racial injustice. In addition, critics argue that the facility and its symbolism represent a harsh backlash against anti-racist movements. They draw parallels to historical practices of racial terror and exploitation. The term Alligator Alcatraz traces back to racist postcards depicting black children as alligator bait. This dehumanizing Jim Crow trope turned racial violence into a form of entertainment and profit. This historical atrocity, well documented in early 20th century media, solidified the devaluation of black life. Today's use of the term and its associated imagery, including merchandise and social media content, continue this legacy of making racial oppression a spectacle. The concept of commodifying racialized pain means transforming acts or symbols of racial oppression into objects for entertainment or profit. This turns historical atrocities and ongoing oppression into something marketable. It effectively desensitizes audiences and hides human suffering. This commodification normalizes and continues racial hierarchies. It allows people to profit from the pain of marginalized groups. This often happens through media, merchandise, or social rituals. For example, Jim Crow-era postcards and souvenirs commodified violent oppression. They sold racist imagery, making racial violence profitable entertainment. Today, social media and Alligator Alcatraz merchandise show how historical racial violence is repackaged. This phenomenon highlights how racial violence can be consumed as spectacle. The use of racial violence as a spectacle normalizes systemic racism. It also obstructs efforts to address present injustices or reckon with history. Racist rhetoric from political messaging uses language, symbols, and narratives that normalize racial prejudice and white supremacy. This rhetoric often includes hidden messages or clear appeals to white identity politics. It also involves fear-mongering about immigration. And it means glorifying historical symbols with racially exclusionary or violent meanings. For example, some Trump supporters celebrate Alligator Alcatraz. This shows how racist historical symbols are co-opted into political discussions. This reinforces systemic racial divides and fuels backlash against racial justice efforts. The embrace of these symbols reflects a broader political strategy. This strategy works to foster historical ignorance. It also undermines anti-racist movements by mocking racial oppression and profiting from it. This rhetoric also aligns with policies that demonize immigrants and reinforce racialized law enforcement. Studies confirm that racist rhetoric and attitudes not only cause discrimination, they also incite real-world violence and hate crimes. These crimes spike following politically charged events. FBI data reveals a significant uptick in hate crimes in counties with greater support for Donald Trump. This correlation began in 2016. This highlights the connection between racialized political rhetoric and violent acts. Hate crimes during that period saw the second largest increase in 25 years. This demonstrates the deep roots of the problem. In addition, racial violence continues to negatively impact the mental and physical health of black communities. It contributes to a public health crisis. The U.S. Senate passed a resolution recognizing racism as a public health emergency. This acknowledges the broad impact on community well-being. This includes chronic stress, poor mental health outcomes, and difficulties in accessing health care. These issues disproportionately affect black and indigenous populations. The resolution details how racially motivated violence, including kidnappings, murders, and mass shootings, has historical roots. It continues to threaten black Americans' well-being. It also cites data showing ongoing violence against indigenous populations, and it highlights the psychological and physical harm they endure due to systemic oppression. In 2018, 908 victims were reported in anti-black intimidation hate crimes alone. White supremacist groups, such as the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, and White Lives Matter, remain active and violent. They particularly operate in states like Ohio. These organizations contribute to a culture of fear and racial animosity. This directly feeds into public spectacles of racial violence. Also, these groups carry out propaganda and violence. As a result, they exacerbate racial tensions across the nation. These groups promote ideologies based on white racial superiority and nationalism. Their actions often include rallies, violent confrontations, and spreading racist, xenophobic messages. Moreover, they also spread anti-government propaganda. These groups have clear links to racially motivated violence. They actively oppose racial justice movements. They seek to maintain white dominance in society. The term Alligator Alcatraz and its celebration highlight this ongoing threat. It reminds us how deeply racial violence and its commodification are embedded in America's systemic racism, hate crime patterns, and extremist group activity. These factors have documented measurable impacts on the safety and health of targeted communities. The Alligator Alcatraz phenomenon is more than a term. It symbolizes a persistent and disturbing trend in America. This trend is where black pain and racial hatred are turned into spectacle. This commodification is rooted in historical practices and fuels ongoing injustices. We must recognize these patterns. It is essential to understand how they affect the lives of black people and other marginalized communities. Dismantling systemic racism requires everyone's understanding and active participation. This ensures a future where racial violence is no longer entertainment or a means of profit. Copyright African Elements.